Welcome back to our segment series on grief. We have David Kennedy here, and we will be talking about some of the topics and questions that we have on grief. So, David, thank you so much for being here. We've been really enjoying doing our grief discussions. I wanted to talk in this particular segment about closure. So it seems like closure might be a myth, but it's something we all are striving for in our processing grief. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's certainly a word that gets thrown around a lot, and the media uses it in different circumstances. I usually begin, when somebody uses that word, I usually begin asking them what they mean by closure. If closure means forgetting the person, then that's never going to happen. You are never going to forget the person, the relationship, or the fact that they died. So that piece of it is just not possible. So if that's what you mean by closure, then we're going to have a very dysfunctional, toxic kind of life where you're going to have to go out of your way to have no memory or no pieces of memory around that person or their when they were alive. If you mean closure in the sense of, okay, that part of grief is over, but grief isn't over. But maybe this piece. So one example, and there's nothing magical about a 1-year period after death. Sometimes people have all these magical things. They say, well, don't make any changes for the first year. Don't do any of this for the first year, as if after that first year it'll all be easier, right? That's not true. But at the same time, there is something about that first year that does bring a closure to that. And that is this, that for that first year, this is the first time I've done this without my parents here. This is the first birthday I've had without them and my sister sending me a card. This is the first, every holiday, everything that happens is a first. But once that 1 year comes, then you've already done it. You've been through your first birthday, and you've been through a birthday without that person there. So while there's nothing magical about the first year, I would say the first year brings a closure to the experience of having to do it for the first time. So if we want to talk about the word closure in that context, the other way that it often gets used is in where there is judicial pieces going on. So somebody was charged for the responsibility, even accidents or homicides or whatever, so that it had to go to court. So people often will say, well, now that's over, there's that will bring closure, that's brought closure. Well, no, it hasn't. It's brought closure to one piece of grief, but here's what happens, because I've been in this situation many, many times. People think that the end of that trial will bring closure to their grief. What it actually does is open up the grief more intensely, because it closes only the part around the trial. And now it's, oh my gosh, now I have to live with the reality that they're not coming back. And all of a sudden, that grief can become more intense, but everybody says, well, you've had closure to your grief, right? So no, I haven't. I've had closure to the legal aspects of the grief, but I haven't had closure to grief. It never ends. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. I'm thankful, because as I say to people, do you want to forget them? Is that the goal? Do you really want to forget about that person? No, I don't want to forget them ever. Good. That means grief is always a part of our life in a good way. It's not a bad thing. Helps us to remember. But closure, so if closure gets used about the end of certain time pieces of my grief, I can live with that. but it's never a closure to grief. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it's totally making sense. And I'm thinking about ambiguous loss. So you had, in our previous segments, we touched on two examples. One is physically present, but psychologically absent. And the other one was psychologically present, but physically absent. So where do people find closure in that?
So a great example of that is the missing and murdered Indigenous women, for instance. So, or all these children that are now we're finding the graves for of the horrible pieces of residential school. We're living that to scene. So how do people in that situation find help? Well, what are we noticing? We're noticing when they're supported, when their grief is acknowledged, when the horror of what it is acknowledged, when they are treated with respect, when we acknowledge both the wrongness of what happened and the ongoing responsibility to correct that. Those are the things that help in those pieces. They may never recover. I mean, we're living the reality right now of the news of the Winnipeg landfill that probably houses bodies, and the fight to have that looked after. They may or may never find them, but there needs to be an acknowledgement that we need to try, that there needs to be a respect that we're supporting you in this journey, an acknowledgement of wrong and acknowledgement of that. The other cases where it's not a deliberate piece, somebody may have been hiking. We've heard of that. I have a friend who has a neighbor who went hiking and never returned, and they still haven't found the body. So it's not an act, we don't think, of deliberate missing, but they're still missing. It's been 10 years and no body. So how do they live with that ambiguity? Well, that's a difficult one, because they will say to you, and I will say to them, and I've worked with this situation, at what point are you prepared to change from your hope from finding them alive to the hope of simply finding them? Because I don't think you'll ever necessarily lose that hope. But if you're hoping to find them alive, that will affect you differently. And I can't tell people when to do that. Some people will never give up that hope. And I don't think it's my place to give up that hope for them. But at the same time, if that is getting in the way of them living in a way that's healthy or appropriate for themselves, or not doing damage, let me put it that way, then we may need to confront that a little bit. That one's a very difficult one.
And what if they never find
and if they never find them, so what I will do in that situation to see is, and I've done this with one of my homicide victims who has never been found, is I worked with her daughter to say, is there a place your mom loved to go? And she said, oh, my mom used to love to walk down by, and in Peterborough there's a little lake in the center of the city, and it's beautiful, and there's walking paths and stuff. My mom used to love to walk down through there. So we kind of worked on, all right, then when you're feeling that, that just that overwhelming of sadness and that, take a walk. Go walk and just talk to your mom as if she's walking with you. Have a conversation. Allow yourself that experience, in order that you are going somewhere on purpose for the express purpose of connecting with that person who now, the relationship is internally, not external. You can't have them physically, they're not there, but you carry them in your heart and in your spirit. So that we want to find a way to honor that. So we can work on that side of it.
I've also heard of people suggesting to write letters to keep that continuity of connection.
And especially if there were unsolved issues, or unresolved issues. So I would say to them, okay, so let's write a letter. Maybe it's for forgiveness, maybe it's forgiving them, maybe they need to forgive you, I don't care. And I said, what do you need to do? Maybe it's that written, and the written letter is important. And then we've done all kinds of things. I know some who have gone to the cemetery and actually buried the letter right there. I know others who have taken a small dish and have burned it right there at the graveside. I know others who have done it and thrown it somewhere. And it doesn't matter to me. It's just the sense of what is it you need to do in order to make that connection and allow yourself to make those things that you need to say that you didn't get a chance to say.
It's so difficult. You're trying to find ways to honor them, trying to find comfort for yourself in the ambiguity of all,
Right.
and maybe never having to find them. And
yeah, and so we have, so again, I come back to that thing I said about, can we learn to live with ambiguity? And do we need life to have all of those answers? Though that's not always easy for us, but I think it's healthy. I think, most of us live with the worldview that says, anything can happen. John Lennon said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, right?
Yes.
We say that, we give words to that, but I don't really know if we understand the truth of that. We think we're in control. So we think we have more control than we do. So when death happens, one of the things it challenges is our ability to control. And grief challenges our ability to control ourselves. So rather than trying to do that, I encourage people that this is an opportunity for us. So it's an opportunity in ambiguous loss. It's an opportunity in grief to learn how to live without the need to control everything.
So I grew up in a country where I did not learn swimming as a child. So when I went into the water as an adult trying to learn how to swim, it was scary.
Yes.
And my instructor would say, just let go of yourself and let the water carry you. And I'm thinking, what do you mean like the water will carry me? I'm so used to learning how to stand on the solid ground that it felt scary to just let myself go and trust the water.
Wow, what a great
carry
analogy.
Me. So when you're saying that, it feels like that's what grief is. It's you can't control it. You have to let
That's a great analogy. And it's absolutely true that the more you fight in the water, you're going to sink, right? And because you get through all your energy. But letting go and learning how to float it's counterintuitive, it seems, right? So we fight that. And that's what grief does to us. Grief is trying to say, no, slow down, pause. Take time to honor this. Don't carry on as if nothing's happened. And the more we try to do that in our controlling piece, we give away what we need to get ourselves centered and be able to deal with this in a good way. And I would say that's the same piece as we walk into the room with a dementia or an Alzheimer's situation. If we're trying to control this situation, if I have to control and know that this is what's going to happen, I'm going to sink. If we can just let go and allow it to be what it is and trust that whatever, it'll be okay, then I think it allows us an opportunity to deal with this in a good way. So it's that control piece, I think it's much more powerful than any of us realize. And when I stop to realize what is it that creates most anxiety in my life, what is it that creates the most challenge and the stress, I have to admit that it's probably because I'm trying to control something I can't control. So, I mean, as we know, and you talk about depression is about that sadness over what I couldn't control in the past. Anxiety is that anxiety about what I can't control in the future. Staying in the moment is that gift of being able to be where I am present and not having to control everything. But most of us fight that in a lot of ways, like you fought the water to try to swim. Thank you for bringing that up, because it's a perfect analogy to this idea of control and trust and letting go. And so in our grief, if we can do that, and that's, I come back to saying to my clients, here's the phrase I want you to do when you start to feel that anxiety building. It's just my grief. It's okay. It's just grief.
My grief.
It's just my grief.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. It's been so incredible just hearing you share these insights and breaking some of the myths that we hold on to on grief. And I would love to connect with you on some more topics on our next segment. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.